Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming along. We're going to get into gas, or get out of gas. It's one of the biggest issues that we face, and I think a lot of people are quite used to the idea that we need to give up fossil fuels. But the way that gas has been promoted over the years is that it's somehow a clean fuel. And it really isn't, actually. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and also what we can practically do in our communities because there's a really big change coming up over the next 10 or 15 years. We all really need to be part of that and certainly aware of it. So just very briefly who I am, although I'm wearing this T-shirt, Campaign Against Climate Change, this is the reason I have this T-shirt is one of the sort of seminal things that happened to me anyway to get me involved in this stuff, which was that someone in Lambeth, I can't remember his name, I think it was Paul, he was a council worker. He was appalled by the fact that George Bush had rejected the Kyoto Protocol. This is back in 2003 or 4, I think. And so he set up the Campaign Against Climate Change. And there was a demonstration outside the American embassy, and a whole lot of people went along. I went to the second year of it when it was quite a bit bigger. And it was just a very formative thing for me. And I sort of became very concerned. I'd always been interested in the environment, but somehow this was now an existential problem. And when I moved to Brighton, I ended up working as a volunteer, and I'm still there now, helping to run the Brighton Peace and Environment Centre. So this is a project of Brighton Peace and Environment Centre. It's a centre that's been in existence for over 40 years. A lot of people know it because it runs a lot of people to Glastonbury Festival. So that's how it makes its money each year, actually, and enables us to run a lot of projects. But what we do at the centre is run community-based projects, and we try and energise the community and work with stakeholders, if you like, from across the people of Brighton and Hove to take forward projects like this. So I'm going to say a little bit about the problem with gas, and then move fairly on to what we should do about it and what we can do about it. So if we can go to the next slide. There was a really good workshop here a few hours ago called Getting Off of Fossil Fuels, and they covered a bit of this ground. But as you can see, we've done this fantastic job, this is from this graphic, of getting rid of fossil fuels from the electricity grid. But in a way, that's the low-hanging fruit bit. I mean, once we get to 100% renewable energy on the grid, which hopefully won't be beyond in the early 2030s perhaps, there's still this other big problem about what we're going to do for the rest of the things that we use energy for, like heating in our homes. And so, we've kind of, in a way, I feel we're doing the easy bit, and that's great. We're getting onto offshore wind and all of these things, and solar to a certain extent. But the big problems are, still there. And if we can go on to the next slide. I'm just going to, a lot of people don't really understand the whole world of gas that well. I'm just going to very briefly say what it is. I'm just about old enough to remember when we had town gas. So this would have been back sort of pre-68, when there were lots of things like this in every town and community. And what they used to do was distill coal and make town gas, and that was piped locally. And what happened in the 60s was that we found very big deposits of natural gas, which is made naturally, if you like, in the same way as oil, deep underground. And they knew it was going to be a much cheaper way of providing gas to people. So it was out with that lot. And basically natural gas came in. It's mostly methane, actually, but it has got some other ingredients in it, like propane. And then just finally, there's liquid natural gas, which is gas that's been just reduced to a liquid, mostly for transporting. So you might see LNG around the place. And you might also see, somebody asked me, what about LPG? And liquid petroleum gas is simply propane and butane. So you see around the tanks that people use when they go camping and things like that. So, yep. So nearly all of our gas actually comes from the North Sea still. Not so much of ours now. We've used all of our kind of easy reserves. We do still get quite a lot from Norway, and then we get a certain amount from places like America and the Middle East. Obviously, the Russian gas has been kind of switched off in the last year or two, so we've stepped up supplies from places like Qatar and the US. Yeah. So, as I say, I remember this period vaguely in my mind, because I was quite young. I was about 6 or 7, which was called, at the time, the Big Switch. And it was a switch from town gas to natural gas. And it happened because, this new gas, if you like, from the North Sea was going to be a lot cheaper. But also, in those days, we had a gas board, which was a government-run entity. It was pre-privatisation. And I think we had a more compliant general public. And so people were just told, we're going to make the switch. And it happened in about 7 years. And all the pipework was changed in that time. And everybody's appliances, something like 40 million appliances. So I vaguely remember somebody from the gas board coming around to our house and doing something to the cooker. But everyone had that. And it was all done in 7 years, which is quite an incredible, it shows what can be done when it's, mandated by the government and people just have to go through that change. And in a sense, what we're about to embark on over the next few years is something which is actually much bigger than the Big Switch. So, I think, we're in quite an interesting period. And, let's look into it in a bit more detail. So the problem with natural gas is that although it's been marketed as this kind of quite green, organic fuel almost by the industry, it's anything but. It's a fossil fuel, and at the moment in the world, it accounts for a fifth of the world's total carbon emissions, which is the same as coal. So you think of all the coal that's being burnt in China and India and whatever, gas is producing as much emissions as that. And the main problem, which is not part of most people's figures, including a lot of the IPCC stuff, is that basically natural gas is methane and it leaks all over the place. And it has, as some of you will know, global warming potential 20 times more than CO2. It doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, but it's a very destructive gas. And we're just beginning to sort of find out where it's leaking from. This is a satellite image. They've sent up a satellite about 5 years ago to look for methane, and it is leaking everywhere. You can see where all the oil fields are in places like Russia and Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan and in the Middle East. There's methane leaking. That is all leaks, basically, from gas installations. And if you were to go in much more detailed, you'd see that it was leaking actually much more locally than that as well, including in the UK. And as I say, the problem with gas is it's an odorless substance. A lot of people, they have to add something to it which smells a bit like rotten eggs, something called mercaptan, to make it even, so people can spot leaks. But that it's just basically the industry being quite lazy, because they know this is a big problem, and a lot of it is just tightening up nuts and bolts and things. It wouldn't cost anything, and it would stop this massive methane problem that we have. Basically it's not a very clean fuel, and we already got the solutions. We've got renewable energy, which we know is going to be the solution ultimately. We don't need fossil fuels, we need renewable electricity. So next one, please. So there's a few key dates coming up. In 2 years' time, there'll be a ban on fitting gas boilers in in new houses that are being built, but that's only going to be a small proportion of the homes in 2050. Let's say that's our target for now. But then from 2035, if your boiler goes, if you've got a gas boiler, then you won't be able to fit a new gas boiler. You'll have to come up with an electrical alternative as things stand at the moment. There was I'll talk about hydrogen in a moment. Can I just check in? How many people use gas? I mean, I do. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something like 93% of us use gas for heating and not necessarily cooking. A lot of people use electric cooking. But most people use gas for heating. And so nearly all of us are going to have to kind of understand what the options are and what we're going to do about it. Say again?
80% of us across the country aren't on the gas grid, I think.
Yeah. Well, those people are using oil, or they're using gas that they're buying in, like propane and things like that. So, yeah. But yeah, it's big. And the government's plans to license all these new oil and gas fields, I actually think it's probably just a political stunt. I don't think it's real. From what I hear, they weren't actually issuing bits of paper licenses to anyone. They were just talking about it. And even once they get round to it, if they were still in government in a few years' time, apparently it takes 10 or 15 years to even get production going from these new fields in the North Sea. And by then, the gas industry will be effectively a stranded asset, i.e. they won't be able to sell their products anywhere, I don't think. Certainly the market will be very much reduced from where we are today. So, yeah, change is coming, and it's coming quite quickly. So what we need to do is, as the previous speaker, Duncan, I think his name was, said, is we really have to ramp up insulation levels, because in order for people to switch to things like heat pumps in their homes, they operate at a much lower temperature. So they only work if you're in an insulated property. And going back 3 hours to the getting off fossil fuels talk, the Jill said that it costs about £1,000, £1,200 per house to get it to insulation level, which isn't a big amount of money in the great scheme of things. And so what with government schemes and things, I can see that being quite achievable. So we need to do that. We clearly need to rapidly increase our renewable capacity. We need to make it really clear that gas boilers are going to be banned, because at the moment the government's saying it's a proposal. So hopefully when we have a new government in a year or so's time, they'll make it official that it will be 2035, and that is immovable, because there will be a big kickback from the industry saying, oh, we shouldn't do this, we can't afford it, cost of living, but that, if you look at, say, the car ban from petrol, fossil fuels from 2030, they have stood firm on that, the government. And in a way, they have to, because the 2050 date, when we're going to be net zero, is enshrined in law. So all of the things that you see happening are as a result of that, because they cascade back into all of government legislation. So the final thing we need to do is expand our storage, and because it's a really annoying thing that people say. What about when the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow? It is true of renewables. You do need to have more storage, and here's the sort of thing that does exist out there, which is I'm not going to try and pronounce the Welsh name, but it's a big pumped hydro storage where off-peak you move the water to a high place, and then when you want the energy at peak times, you let it use gravity to create power. So we can do a lot more pumped hydro out there. And one of the things that's quite exciting is they're just now developing in other countries, actually in Europe, using old mines for because it's the same process really. You pump up during off-peak, and you let it fall during peak. So it's basically a battery, big battery. So if we can go to the next. I just wanted to show you a couple of ads of kind of what we're up against a little bit in terms of making this change. These are real adverts that are out at the moment. This one's an American one. But as you can see, this is the kind of narrative that's put out, that it's basically clean natural gas, and now US emissions are lower than they've been in a generation. Well, that's because gas has replaced coal. There's no other reason for that. Coal is a really dirty fuel. Gas is a slightly less dirty fuel. So anyway, that's from some group, who knows who they are, Energy for Progress. And another one. Here's another one, another American one, actually. But protecting our planet, paid for by Americans for Climate Solutions. But it's all about trying to keep the gas industry going. And I think there's one more, actually. Oh yeah, here's a BP one for the UK. And so it's basically the industry is very keen to keep gas in the energy mix, and they'll say, well, renewables, they're just not reliable enough. We have to have, but they can be. They know what the future is going to be, the end of this industry, and they're just trying to hold on for a bit longer, really. Next one. So one of the ways in which the industry wants people to believe that there's a future for gas in this country is through hydrogen. And you hear this a lot. So if you were to go along to a plumber or whatever at the moment and say, oh, I'm interested in switching out of my gas and going into a heat pump or whatever, they'll probably say, oh, well, all you need to do is buy a new boiler, which is hydrogen ready. Well, be worried about that, because hydrogen is not coming for home heating. It's a scam. And even the government now, a couple of weeks ago, said we don't see hydrogen being part of the solution. But this whole thing about green hydrogen, which is basically hydrogen produced using renewable energy, it's way too expensive. It's for lots and lots of reasons, it won't work for home heating, which is what we're talking about here today. So the people who've been lobbying for it are the gas industry and the boiler manufacturers. It obviously costs more to retool your production lines to create heat pumps, rather than just sell people a boiler that's hydrogen ready, which is, you just need to make a few switch. When the hydrogen arrives, it's not arriving, so don't be fooled by that. Okay. So the other kind of seminal point for me happened with this project happened about a year and a half ago, and Brighton Hove Council's Progressive Council, was a Green Council at that point, had set a target of 2030, which is very ambitious, to be net zero. So let's be clear about what that means. It means that all of the green space in Brighton, and that includes all the downs, the farms and everything, because they own those, that bit of CO2 equivalent that gets absorbed by all the greens, everyone's gardens and everything else, has to equal any emissions that's being produced. And the problem with that is that even if you had a lot of green space, it only takes up a very small amount. And so we would need in Brighton a city, a land area that's 50 times the size of Brighton, to be able to equal our emissions as they're expected in 2035. We don't have that available. And lots of places don't have that. Lots of London boroughs and other big cities and so on. So I went to a talk by the council, and they were talking about their pathway to net zero, because it was their plan. And there was some interesting things being discussed. I'm certainly not knocking the council. They're doing what they can, I think, in a way. But for me, they were talking about things like, we're bringing in new cargo bikes to move things around the city, and encouraging people to do more recycling. That's over. That all had to be mainstream kind of 20 years ago. Where we are now, we're in a climate emergency, and what we need to understand is, where are our emissions coming from in Brighton and Hove? And if you really want to get rid of them by 2030, that's about 6 or 7 years, not much time. And the biggest chunk of all of that is from gas, because nearly everyone in the city is using it to heat their homes. So, and all the businesses are using it to heat their factories and offices and everything else. So I think 2030 is for the birds. I mean, I think, frankly, we've got to be realistic. It ain't going to happen in 6 years. But what we felt was that, because I said, well, what about the gas at this presentation? And there was a sort of slightly embarrassed silence. And they were saying, oh, well, we're waiting for see what the government comes up with on that. You know, it's all going to be down to the central government. So I sort of came away from that. And fortunately, as I say, I work for Brighton Peace and Environment Centre. And I thought, well, if the council doesn't have a plan, the community needs to come up with a plan, because we're the ones who are going to be affected by this massive change, which is going to happen. It's, you know, if you speak to all the experts, they say that this is happening in the next 15 to 20 years, that everyone's going to get off of gas and onto renewable electricity. So, so we came away thinking, what's the best thing to do? And the reason why I'm doing this talk, actually, is to sort of try and sow some seeds and see if people might be interested in doing other similar things in their communities, because you know, no local authorities that I could find in Britain have come up with a plan to get off gas. And that's pretty awful, given that we're in a climate emergency and a lot of them have set targets of 2030, 2040. And I think it's because it's seen as being in the too difficult box. And the easier things to talk about is the things we're already doing in a way, which is, as I say, decarbonisation of the grid and getting everyone on driving EV cars. But we're going to be left with this really big problem, which is everyone using gas for heat. And it needs to change, and it needs to happen quite quickly. So basically, we thought, well, we'll come up with a plan, but we're quite a consensual organisation. So we thought, we're not going to sit there as campaigners saying you're rubbish to the council. What we're going to do is we're going to work with the council. We want them to adopt it. We want them to be part of it, and we want everyone, the utilities, all the big, energy users in the city, and all, communities generally, to all be bought into this and to own it. And so our project, which Out of Gas, is along those lines, and I'm quite pleased that this chap has joined us, because we were in a small workshop yesterday. He lives in the Netherlands, where actually they already have confronted this problem, because they've got a big gas field there called Groningen, and there was a lot of seismic activity happening in that because of taking all the gas out of the ground, and people's houses were falling down. So the government mandated every municipality in the Netherlands to come up with a plan to get off gas. So we don't have to look very far to see some pretty good examples of where people and communities, local authorities, have developed plans and they're getting on with this. So next slide, please. And just to give an idea of the challenge, I know these graphs are a bit annoying because they can be a bit depressing, but our reason for doing it, producing stuff like this, is just to show the scale of the challenge. And so there's the council's target. That's the kind of trajectory we're on, which is all mostly due to the decarbonisation of the grid. So we're not actually going to hit 2050 at this rate. We have to be realistic about being more ambitious about our plan. So So the plan wouldn't be tree planting. It's not going to be green hydrogen for the reasons I've said. And basically, the only solution that the International Energy Agency and everyone else is saying, there's a consensus around this, is to replace gas with renewable electricity. And that is Rampion Wind Farm, by the way, and that's Brighton in the background. It's about 120 turbines, and it produces enough energy for the city. Of course, it just goes into the grid. But they're just about to expand that. In fact, they're going to triple it in size in the next 5 years with Rampion 2. Actually, you can hear a lot of kind of doom and gloom, but in terms of decarbonisation of the grid, there is a lot going on that's quite positive. There's an awful lot. If we used all the renewable offshore wind capacity in the UK, we could power the whole of Europe, everything that Europe needed in terms of electricity. It's an incredible fact, but it's a very windy coastline, and we've got that capacity. So it's an exciting opportunity for this country in a way, because we're going to become a big exporter of renewable electricity in the years to come. And this isn't just wishful thinking. This is consented plans. People are putting billions into it, putting cables out across the North Sea, and we're going to be part of a grid, which is where we're exporting energy when we've got it, renewable electricity, and maybe bring some in when we're a bit short. So yeah, next slide. So yeah, the main options that everyone is going to have to get their heads around is basically they're quite limited at the moment, but you'll hear a lot of talk about heat pumps, and that's one there. They work very much like an aircon unit, but in reverse. So yeah, they use a refrigerant inside it, so they take air in, and they're borrowing that heat from the air. And then there's ground source heat pumps. They're a bit more tricky because you do need land to do that, but on open sites where they're perhaps building new homes, it's a fantastic opportunity. Electric boilers are another option, which a lot of people might like because they basically operate the same way. They're quite expensive at the moment because electricity costs more than gas, but people might quite like that idea of having a boiler in their home that operates a bit like a gas boiler, but it just uses electricity to heat the water up. And then the final thing is district heating. This is where you have a single energy source that serves a whole community. I actually run a district heating system in Brighton that provides energy for about 200 flats and a whole load of commercial space. And we've got an energy centre which uses biomass at the moment. We're going to be getting off of that and onto heat pumps. But at the moment, the government is not providing subsidy for heat pumps in commercial premises. They are providing us with subsidy for burning biomass of about 40 grand a year. And it's very hard to turn around to residents in our development to say, actually, because we want to have a cleaner fuel, we're throwing away 40 grand for the next 20 years from the government, which is obviously coming off their bills. So that needs to change, actually. Okay. So what we've done so far is we've set up a sort of working group of people, volunteers like myself, and then we've been interviewing really people who've got knowledge in this area. So, and these are all kind of people, mostly local, but we have gone international a bit as well. So we've been talking to people really in the energy sector, people who run the grid, to see what their plans are, and energy suppliers, generators, and then we've been talking to the council and people in academia, because there's a lot of research going on in this area, as you can imagine, as well. And so we've got a lot of knowledge now about kind of the pathway forward based on what the experts, if you like, are telling us. And that will just continually. We see this as it's certainly not a plan that's going to end up in a document that's going to sit anywhere. It's a constantly evolving organic plan, and it'll be digitally based. That it's because we're in a very fast changing situation, it would be pointless to produce anything that was just a tome that nobody probably would read anyway. So certainly we can learn from cities internationally. It's not just in the Netherlands. There's cities all over the world grappling with this problem. In the States, there's some really interesting stuff going on. New York, just a few months ago, said they were going to ban all gas boilers. So people, they've got a phase out already developed in their plans. So it really needs to be, we need to learn from what other people are doing, the great stuff that some people are doing out there, and use that. And then we can pass that back, our knowledge as well, so it can be constant. That's actually a website from Utrecht, I think. So just as an example of one of the ones, I could have looked up any municipality in the Netherlands and found a website like this, which is full of information that's useful for people to access. So yeah, next one. Another thing that we're looking to do is establish heat hubs on the high street. So there's a couple of locations in Brighton that we're looking at, and these will just be places where people can come in and find out about, because it is a bit of a technical thing when you're thinking, oh, what am I going to do about swapping out my gas boiler? You need someone to talk to who's quite independent, who's going to give you some good quality advice. This is one that's recently opened in Swindon, actually. So these will open all around the country, I'm sure, perhaps by local authorities or groups like ours, to help people to make this big change over the next 15 or 20 years. And the finance is going to be very key to this, because at the moment, you can get a government grant to get rid of your gas boiler and put a heat pump in, about £5,000, and then Octopus Energy will give you a bit more help. But this is a very fast changing situation, and so having a ready source of information that you know how to inform you about the decisions that you're going to need to make, and of course the technical help as well. So I think, is that it? Yeah, it is. That's it. So yeah, I think it's, I think we live in exciting times because this is a time of great change, when big things are going to be happening, and this is one of those big things. At the end of the day, we're in a climate emergency, and it will happen, and it will partly happen because the market is driving in that direction. But it'll also happen because there's enough people out there like us who really care about this stuff and have been pushing for it for decades. It's a shame we haven't done it 20 years ago, but look, here we are. And the change is coming quite quickly. So, yeah, that's our project.
Give it up for Mike Butler.